Come back to our channel, where real-life inspired stories teach unforgettable lessons. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you powerful narratives that will shift your heart, your thinking, and sometimes even your life. Today's story is about pride, disrespect, and an unexpected reversal of power that left an entire corporation in stunned silence. It begins on a crisp Monday morning on Fifth Avenue, the kind of morning where the sun catches on glass towers and turns the sidewalks into rivers of light. Vincent Gray, 36, stepped out of his Bentley in a perfectly tailored navy suit, his Rolex glinting just beneath his sleeve. He was the youngest CEO in Orion Tech's history, a man who built his legacy on ruthless decisions and 4 o'clock IMing wake-ups. To Vincent, time was money, and people who stood in his way were wasted time. As he pulled up to the front entrance of the Orion Tech building, the place he commanded like a king in his castle, he was met with an unexpected obstacle. An elderly man, dressed in a faded blue security uniform, standing firmly at the curb with one hand raised. "Sorry, sir. No parking here. Fire zone," the old man said calmly, his voice as still and grounded as the concrete beneath them. Vincent didn't even process the words before his irritation surged. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he barked, stepping out of the car. "This is my company." The old man didn't move. "Rules are rules, son," he said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that only age and wisdom grant. That was when it happened. A moment Vincent would come to replay 1,000 times in his mind. Without thinking, maybe because of the cameras, maybe because of pride, Vincent's hand snapped across the old man's face. Not hard enough to draw blood, but enough to make bystanders gasp. "I'll have your job," Vincent hissed, brushing past him as the old man slowly touched his cheek, stunned but composed. What Vincent didn't know, and what the entire company would soon learn, was that the man he had just struck wasn't just any security guard. He was a ghost in the world of finance, a name whispered in investors' circles. The silent shareholder who owned a controlling stake in Orion Tech but had never shown his face to the public, Henry Langston. Once dubbed the Phantom of Wall Street for his anonymous influence in boardrooms, Henry had built empires, then disappeared from the public eye, living quietly and observing the world he once ruled. But that morning, dressed not in Armani or Brioni but in the humble blue of a security guard, he had chosen to stand outside his own building to see, really see, the kind of people who walked through its doors every day. He hadn't planned to intervene, but rules were rules, and when he'd asked Vincent to move the car, he hadn't done it to provoke. He did it because fire lanes save lives. What followed would shake the very core of Orion Tech's leadership, as an internal memo sent just hours later would reveal the true identity of the man at the door. That slap, as impulsive as it was cruel, would become the catalyst for a reckoning that would test not only Vincent's career but his entire identity. Because in a world obsessed with titles, wealth, and hierarchy, this story reminds us that real power often comes dressed in silence and humility. And sometimes the person you look down on is the very one standing above you. By the time Vincent reached the 42nd floor, his private sanctuary lined with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Midtown Manhattan, he had already forgotten the incident, or rather, he'd chosen to forget it. To him, it was nothing more than a passing annoyance, a wrinkle in an otherwise flawless morning. His assistant, Lauren, handed him an espresso without a word, but she didn't quite meet his eye. People in the office had heard. Rumors traveled fast, especially when a public slap happened in front of one of the city's most prominent corporate headquarters. Vincent sat behind his desk, scrolling through his calendar, pretending not to notice the tension that had settled into the air like static. He was used to control, meetings, mergers, markets, but something about the quiet murmurs outside his door unsettled him in a way he couldn't quite name. Then came the email. It wasn't from a name he recognized. It came from a generic HR address, flagged confidential URG. He clicked it, casually at first, sipping his coffee, his mind already focused on a shareholder report he needed to prep for the afternoon. But the moment his eyes scanned the first line, his hand froze mid-air. 2. Vincent Gray, CEO, Orion Tech Inc. From Langston Family Holdings. Subject: Ownership and Behavioral Investigation. Mr. Gray. Earlier today, an incident occurred at the main entrance of Orion Tech headquarters involving yourself and a Mr. Henry A. Langston, majority stakeholder and founder emeritus of Orion Tech. We are opening a formal review into your conduct and temporarily suspending your executive privileges pending internal evaluation. Vincent read the paragraph 3 times before he understood its weight. Henry A. Langston. No, that had to be a mistake. Henry Langston was a myth, a legend, the name attached to the founding documents of Orion Tech back in its startup days, a man who had reportedly sold his interests decades ago and disappeared into philanthropic work. But he wasn't a myth. Not anymore. He was the old man in the blue coat, the one Vincent had dismissed like a valet. The blood drained from Vincent's face as he scrolled further, seeing attached security camera footage, frozen frames of his outburst, a blurry image of his hand raised, the old man recoiling. Every muscle in his body stiffened. The silence around him no longer felt like luxury. It felt like judgment, like exposure. He called Lauren back in, his voice unusually thin. "Get me Jason from legal, now." But Jason had already called, and so had the board, and so had the press, who had somehow caught wind of the unfortunate interaction between Orion Tech's CEO and a beloved figure in the financial world. Within hours, Vincent's name was trending on every major financial news outlet. Not for a record-breaking quarter, not for an innovative tech rollout, but for publicly assaulting a man in uniform who turned out to be his boss's boss. Headlines screamed variations of the same phrase: billionaire disguised as guard gets assaulted by own CEO. The story had legs, and they were sprinting. Social media erupted. Some called for Vincent's resignation. Others called it a publicity stunt, a test orchestrated by Langston to expose character. But the truth was simpler and more damning. Vincent had failed a basic test of decency. Behind closed doors, emergency meetings were held. Investors debated whether Vincent's brilliance in business outweighed the PR disaster. But none of that mattered when the phone rang that night and Vincent, alone now in his penthouse, lights dimmed, scotch untouched, picked up to hear a voice he'd never heard before. It was calm, steady, weathered like wind on stone. "Mr. Gray," the voice said, "this is Henry Langston." Vincent swallowed, unable to speak. "I built this company with my own hands, and I entrusted its future to men and women I believed had vision and honor. You showed vision. But today you showed me who you are when you think no one's watching." "Mr. Langston," Vincent finally managed, "I didn't know it was you. I thought that I was just a nobody," Langston finished for him. "That's the problem, Vincent. You think respect is earned only by title. But the true leaders I've known, real giants of industry, show kindness to janitors, to waiters, to drivers. Because who you are when no one's watching is who you are, period." Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then, quietly, Langston said, "We're meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. You will not be in a suit. You will not bring your assistant. You'll come alone. And I suggest you be early." Then the line went dead. Vincent sat there, numb. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt small, like a child who had just broken something irreplaceable. and for the first time in years, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. The next morning came like a verdict, and Vincent barely slept a minute of it. The city outside his window carried on with its usual rhythm. Horns blaring, dogs barking, early risers jogging along the East River. But inside his apartment the silence was suffocating. He didn't wear his usual tailored suit or $1,000 shoes. He chose a plain gray shirt, slacks without a designer label, and walked out the door with no driver, no entourage, no time to waste. The air was cool, almost cleansing, but Vincent felt nothing except the weight of shame pressed against his spine. When he reached the lobby of Orion Tech, he didn't enter through the VIP entrance. He didn't swipe his badge or announce his name. He simply walked toward the same place he had dismissed yesterday, the security desk. And there, already waiting, was the man he had struck, the man who could end his career with a single word. Henry Langston sat on a folding chair near the back wall, legs crossed, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a quiet smile playing on his face, as if none of this was unusual. "You're early," he said without rising. "That's a good start." Vincent nodded, unsure of what to say, his throat dry. He stood there, awkward, unsure if he should sit, kneel, apologize again. Henry gestured to the folding chair beside him. "Sit, and don't speak until I ask you something." For a man in his 80s, Henry's voice was sharp, clear, and commanding in a way that made Vincent's practiced boardroom tone sound manufactured. The two men sat there for a few minutes in silence. People passed by, some recognizing Vincent, others just rushing to their offices, none quite understanding why the CEO was sitting like a schoolboy in trouble next to a man they assumed was just another security guard. Finally, Henry spoke. "Do you know how many people I've hired in my life, Vincent?" Vincent shook his head. "Thousands. Across countries, continents, decades. I've watched brilliant men rise and fools implode. I've seen greed eat genius alive and humility lift the mediocre to greatness. But one thing never fails. How a man treats someone he thinks can do nothing for him, that tells you everything." Vincent lowered his gaze, heat flooding his face. "When I stood in front of your Bentley yesterday, I wasn't testing you. I was simply doing my job. Say, you failed that moment not because you hit me, though that was a mistake, but because you believed that your title gave you permission to disregard humanity." He paused, then asked, "Do you remember what you said after you struck me?" Vincent whispered, "I said I'd have your job." Henry nodded. "Yes, and I had yours in my pocket the entire time." The words were not angry, they were true. Simple, devastating truth. "Let me tell you something, Vince. Trust complexity. I started this company with 3 men in a basement who believed in an idea and nothing else. We didn't have luxury cars or rooftop bars. We had coffee-stained shirts, overdrawn bank accounts, and trust. What we built wasn't just tech. It was a culture of respect, of decency, of never thinking you're better than the janitor sweeping your mess. You've made this company rich in numbers, I'll give you that, but you've made it poor in spirit." Vincent's heart clenched. He thought of the office parties where no one truly smiled, the interns who were too afraid to speak, the security guards he'd never once called by name. He thought of the company's last philanthropic initiative, a publicity stunt he'd outsourced to marketing, and the empty applause it received. "I don't hate you, son," Henry said softly. "I was you once, angry, proud, hungry. I lost people along the way because I couldn't see past my own reflection. But life, if you're lucky, kicks your ego in the teeth early enough for you to change. Consider this your luck." Vincent looked up, his voice finally returning. "What now, are you going to fire me?" Henry leaned back, swirling the coffee in his thermos. "You think firing you would teach you more than this moment already has?" He stood slowly, with the grace of a man who had weathered 100 storms and remained unshaken. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in legacy. The kind you don't build with numbers, but with choices. So here's mine. I'm not firing you. Yet. But you're stepping down for 30 days. No power, no titles. You'll report to facilities. You'll wear a uniform. You'll work the ground floor. You'll know every name and every job in this building before you sit in that chair again. And maybe then you'll deserve to... Vincent opened his mouth, then closed it. He couldn't argue. Not with the man, not with the lesson. He simply nodded. Yes, sir. Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. Not to command, but to reassure. Leadership isn't about being above. It's about seeing below. Let's see if you can learn that. And with that, the man in the blue coat turned and walked away, not with the swagger of wealth, but with the dignity of wisdom. Vincent remained seated, not because he had to, but because, for the first time in his adult life, he felt the weight of real leadership, and it was humbling. The next morning, Vincent Gray arrived at Orion Tech headquarters, not in his Bentley, not with a sleek leather briefcase or a tailored Italian suit, but in a standard-issue Navy jumpsuit with a plastic badge clipped to his chest that read Facilities V. Gray. He stood awkwardly at the rear staff entrance where the delivery drivers, janitors, and maintenance crews filtered in each morning with yawns and paper cups of coffee, rubbing sleep from their eyes. No one recognized him. A few nodded politely, assuming he was new. No one stared, no one whispered. The anonymity stung more than he expected, not because his ego missed the attention, but because for the first time he realized how many invisible people worked beneath the floor he had once ruled from. The head of facilities was a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s named Darla, with strong hands and a blunt voice that didn't bother softening for anyone. "You're the CEO?" she asked on day one, raising an eyebrow. "Used to be," Vincent replied sheepishly. She nodded once. "Well, now you're mine. Grab a mop." And so began his re-education. Day 1. Cleaning bathrooms on the 2nd floor. The tiles were unforgiving, the smells worse. But what shocked him most wasn't the work. It was how often he'd passed these very restrooms without ever thinking about the person who cleaned them. Day 2. Emptying trash bins across 10 floors. By lunchtime, his arms ached, his knees burned, and the cuffs of his jumpsuit were smeared with coffee stains and toner dust. On day 3, he met Luis, the soft-spoken night janitor who had worked at Orion Tech for 16 years without ever getting a holiday bonus. Luis showed him where the supply closet was and offered half of his sandwich during their 10-minute break. "You from another branch?" he asked. "No," Vincent replied quietly. "I'm learning." Luis didn't press, just nodded, like he understood there were lessons that required silence to sink in. By the end of the first week, Vincent had memorized names he never knew before. Keisha, who restocked the vending machines and sent half her paycheck to her grandmother. Bo, the HVAC tech, who once fixed the executive suite's air conditioning in a single hour and never got thanked. Raj, who mopped with music in his ears and danced when he thought no one was watching. Each face, each task, chipped away at the wall Vincent had built around himself for years, and slowly, something unexpected grew in its place. Respect, gratitude, a strange sense of peace. On day 9, he held the elevator open for a young woman carrying a tray of cafeteria lunches. She glanced at his name tag and did a double-take. "Vincent Gray," she said. "You're like the Vincent Gray?" He smiled sheepishly. What happened?" she asked. "Long story," he said. "Short version, I forgot what people look like when you stop looking down." She blinked, clearly confused, but said nothing as the doors closed. Word began to spread. Not loudly, but in quiet exchanges during break room coffee refills and loading dock cigarette breaks. The CO was mopping floors. And unlike a PR stunt, he didn't have cameras following him. He didn't give interviews. He just worked. That alone made people curious. By the second week, Vincent was no longer just tolerated. He was welcomed. Someone brought him an extra coffee on Thursday. Someone else saved him a spot in the break room. He sat with employees whose names he couldn't have recalled a month earlier, laughing over stories about busted elevators, broken printers, and the infamous rat that once triggered an entire fire drill. These people, his people, were the backbone of the building. And now he could see it. But the real shift happened on a rainy Wednesday when a pipe burst in the basement, flooding the storage corridor near the server room. Most of the senior staff were already home, but the facilities team sprang into action. Darla was shouting orders, people were slipping on wet tile, and for the first time in his life, Vincent wasn't watching the chaos from behind glass. He was in it, kneeling in ankle-deep water with a wrench, trying to hold a flashlight steady while Luis capped a valve with shaking hands. "Hold it still," Luis muttered. "If this slips, the whole floor's done." Vincent's hands trembled, soaked and freezing, but he held the beam firm. When the water finally stopped, the team erupted in tired cheers. "Nice job, Gray," Darla said, clapping him on the back. He smiled, drenched and exhausted, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Earned pride. Real pride. Not from status, not from wealth, but from being useful, from being part of something. Later that night, alone in the locker room, he stared at himself in the scratched mirror above the sink. The man looking back wasn't the CEO who had struck an old man for doing his job. He was someone humbler, hungrier, not for power, but for perspective. And in that moment, Vincent understood something deeper than any investor report or strategy pitch had ever taught him. To lead was not to rise above. It was to bend down, to lift, to see, to serve. By the start of the fourth week, Vincent no longer felt like a guest in the world beneath the glass offices. He felt like he belonged there, and yet he knew time was running out. Every morning he arrived early, still in uniform, still anonymous to most of the senior staff, who avoided eye contact as they rushed past the maintenance crew like ghosts. But down in the halls, where the floors actually got cleaned and the coffee machines were refilled, Vincent had earned something money couldn't buy: trust. He no longer looked at people and saw titles. He saw effort, saw pride in small things, saw pain behind smiles, and dreams folded into lunch bags. He started staying late to help restock supplies, fixed a vending machine without being asked, and even comforted a young intern who'd spilled soup on her blouse and cried in the stairwell because no one upstairs knew her name. He knew that pain now, the pain of being unseen, of being reduced to function. And yet, just as he was finding peace in this unseen world, an email came that yanked him back into the one he had left behind. Board review meeting mandatory Thursday, 9 a.m., conference room A1. Formal attire required. The email had no signature, no hint of tone, just the cold finality of a summons. Vincent stared at it for several minutes, before closing his locker and heading home, unsure for the first time whether he even wanted to return to the top floor. Thursday came, and he stood before his closet like a man choosing between old skin and new purpose. In the end, he chose neither. He arrived in simple slacks, a white shirt with sleeves rolled, and a weathered blazer that didn't scream CEO or janitor, just human. When he stepped into conference room A1, 12 board members sat in a semicircle, folders open, expressions guarded. And at the far end of the table, calm as ever, sat Henry Langston, wearing a charcoal sweater, wire-rimmed glasses, and a look that didn't judge. It waited. Vincent took the empty seat in the center, uninvited but not unwelcome. For a few seconds, silence stretched. Then a woman from legal began. Mr. Gray, you've been on administrative leave for 28 days. During that time, the board has reviewed your conduct, the media fallout, and internal morale metrics. There's been considerable debate about your fitness to resume leadership. I understand, Vincent said simply. The CFO chimed in, yet despite the scandal, internal employee engagement has increased. Feedback from the ground floor has been unexpectedly positive. Someone else cleared their throat. We've received over 80 anonymous letters from junior staff praising a new cleaning guy named Vincent who listens, helps, and treats everyone with dignity. Imagine our surprise. The room let out a soft, uncomfortable chuckle. Even Henry's lips twitched. You humiliated the company, one board member finally said, harsher than the rest, and then somehow made it noble. I didn't do it to be noble, Vincent said, voice steady. I did it because I forgot how to see people. I forgot what we built this for. Somewhere along the way, success made me blind. I thought leading meant being first, but now I know it means being last, when it's hard, and first when it's time to stand up. I don't expect your forgiveness. But I'm not asking to return to my office. I'm asking to keep working. The room was quiet again. Then Henry leaned forward, tapping a pen once against the table. What would you change, Mr. Gray, if we gave you back the title? Vincent took a breath. First, I'd meet every team, not in a boardroom, on their floor, in their words. Second, I'd scrap the executive-only perks and open those lounges to all levels. Third, I'd implement a program where every executive spends 2 weeks a year in ground-level operations, not as observers. I want us to remember the weight of labor, not just the weight of stock shares. Henry's eyes twinkled with something between approval and surprise. And if we said no? Then I'd keep cleaning, Vincent replied. I've learned more with a mop than I ever did with $1 million contract. For a moment, no one moved. Then Henry stood slowly and walked around the table until he reached Vincent's side. He extended his hand. Not as a billionaire, not as a founder, but as a man. Welcome back, Mr. Gray. Let's start from here. Vincent stood, shook his hand, and something in the room shifted. The board no longer saw the man who slapped a stranger. They saw the man who had earned the right to lead again, not through dominance, but through humility. One more thing, Henry said before they adjourned. Your uniform, keep it. Wear it every Friday. Why? Vincent asked. So you never forget what it feels like to be invisible? Vincent nodded, and deep down he knew he never would. The following Monday marked not just Vincent Gray's return to the CEO's office. It marked the quiet rebirth of Orion Tech. He didn't come back with fanfare or speeches or corporate memos printed in gold. He walked in through the side entrance as he had done for the past month, still wearing the same blue uniform, though this time over a collared shirt, the badge now pinned next to a lapel pin he'd never worn before, a tiny metal broom. It was a gift from Darla, handed to him without a word that morning as she nodded once and turned back to inventory logs. Don't forget where you came back from, she had said, and he wouldn't. From that day on, every Friday became ground hour, a new internal policy mandating all senior executives spend at least 1 hour working in a non-office department, stocking supplies, taking customer service calls, shadowing security shifts. Some grumbled, others rolled their eyes. But over time the effects became impossible to deny. Department silos weakened, conversations deepened, emails became more human, less robotic. People at every level of Orion Tech began to see one another not as roles, but as stories, as lives. Vincent himself never missed a Friday. Sometimes he was on kitchen duty. Other times he helped sweep the lobby before the first employees arrived. And no matter where he worked, he listened. Deeply, without agenda. He learned about Keisha's dream of putting her brother through college, about Luis's side job fixing old typewriters and the way he still wrote letters to his late wife, about Raj's dream to choreograph a dance crew, and how he once taught movement to underprivileged kids after midnight shifts. And in those conversations, Vincent rediscovered the soul of the company. Not the brand, not the tech, not the stock price, but the people who had kept its heart beating long before quarterly reports existed. It wasn't long before investors began to notice something different, too. Retention rates improved, internal referrals rose. Press that once mocked the slap-heard round Fifth Avenue now ran headlines like "The CEO Who Learned to Lead from the Ground Up." A documentary team even requested access, which Vincent declined, not because he was ashamed, but because some transformations aren't meant to be broadcast. They're meant to be lived. Yet one day, about 6 months after his return, something unexpected happened. Henry Langston called him not to reprimand, not to test, but to invite. "I want you to come to my home," he said simply. "Tonight." Vincent arrived just after sunset, driving himself through the narrow, tree-lined streets of the Hudson Valley to a modest stone house that looked more like a retired professor's retreat than the home of a billionaire. Henry greeted him in slippers and a cardigan, ushered him into a warm room lined with books and photographs. No servants, no pretension, just a crackling fire and 2 armchairs facing each other like old friends. "I wanted to see the man again," Henry said, handing him a glass of water. "Not the executive, the one who listened." Vincent sat, quiet, humbled. "You know," Henry continued, settling into his chair, "when I started Orion Tech, I dreamed of changing the world. But somewhere along the way, the world changed us. Money got loud, compassion got quiet, and I started to wonder if I'd lost the fight." He looked up, eyes gentle. "But then you failed gloriously, publicly. And instead of hiding, you chose to learn. You fell hard, but you fell forward." "Because of you," Vincent replied. Henry shook his head. "No, because you decided the lesson mattered more than your pride." A long silence followed, filled only by the soft hiss of burning logs. Then Henry added, "One day I'll step away fully, and when I do, I need to know this company isn't just financially healthy, it's morally awake, that it has a soul, that its leaders walk the same floors as its cleaners." "I won't forget," Vincent said. "Ever." Henry smiled. "Good, because the title of CEO is rented, but character, that's owned." They sat for another hour, trading stories about mistakes, regrets, small victories. Before Vincent left, Henry gave him one last thing, a weathered notebook filled with his thoughts over decades of leadership. "Don't quote me in interviews," he joked. "Just read it when the noise gets too loud." Driving home that night, Vincent didn't feel like a man who'd survived scandal. He felt like someone who had shed a version of himself to become someone better, someone lighter. And while the road ahead would still be full of hard decisions and complex battles, he knew he had something now that no business school ever taught. The knowledge that power was not in being first or feared or flawless, but in being accountable, being human, and above all being kind. It was nearly a year to the day since Vincent Gray had raised his hand in arrogance and struck a man he thought was beneath him. And now he stood on the very steps outside Orion Tech where that moment had taken place. Only this time, not as the man he once was. The sun was rising behind the city skyline, casting golden light over the avenue, the same golden light that had once reflected off his Bentley's hood like a spotlight on ego. But there was no Bentley today. Just Vincent, dressed in the same blue uniform he now wore every Friday, standing quietly beside the bronze plaque the company had recently installed on the building's front wall. "Respect is the foundation of everything we build." Below the words was a small engraving of a broom and a brief dedication to the invisible workers who keep the world moving. It was unveiled without press, without ceremony, by Vincent himself, and while passers-by barely noticed it, those who knew, truly knew, understood the depth of what it represented. As employees began arriving for the day, some waved at him like an old friend. Others stopped to shake his hand. No one called him Sir anymore. They called him Vincent. And that, in his heart, meant more than CEO ever did. Inside, the building pulsed with a quiet pride. Departments once siloed now collaborated in small but powerful ways. Monthly appreciation days recognized not just star developers but cafeteria workers and night shift cleaners. In the executive suite, an empty glass case stood on Vincent's desk, and when asked what it was for, he always replied, "To remind me that what matters can't be put on display." But perhaps the most beautiful change couldn't be seen. It had to be felt. And Vincent felt it every day, in the way people spoke more gently to one another, the way junior employees dared to share ideas without fear, the way the culture had shifted from performance. The final piece of that transformation came when Vincent was invited to speak at a university business symposium. Something he once would have done, with slides, buzzwords, and quotes from Forbes. But now he stood before the eager crowd of young future leaders with nothing but a story. He told them everything. The slap, the shame, the uniform, the nights mopping floors, and the conversations that changed his life. There were no jokes, no corporate polish, just truth. And at the end, when a student asked, "What's the one thing you'd tell your younger self?" Vincent answered without hesitation, "Never assume someone's worth based on how much noise they make. The quiet ones, the janitors, the receptionists, the people holding open doors. Sometimes they carry more wisdom than an entire boardroom. And sometimes they're the ones writing your paycheck without ever telling you." The auditorium was silent, not out of discomfort but reverence. That silence was the mark of a message received. When he left the stage, Vincent felt a calm he hadn't known before. Not the rush of applause or the sting of pride, but the steady weight of having lived through his own reckoning and emerged honest. That night, as he walked home through the city, he passed a young security guard standing outside another office building, shivering in the wind. The kid looked about 19, rubbing his hands for warmth. Vincent stopped, shrugged off his coat, and handed it over without a word. The boy tried to protest, but Vincent simply smiled and said, "It's just a coat. What matters is that you're seen." Then he turned and walked on, disappearing into the crowded sidewalk like any other man. No title, no camera, no legacy carved in stone. Just a man who had once fallen hard and risen slowly by remembering what makes us truly human. And that, in the end, is the lesson we hope you take with you today. Because respect isn't something you reserve for the powerful. It's something you extend to everyone, especially those you think have nothing to give. Because the moment you look down on someone might be the very moment your life is being measured. And maybe, just maybe, the person you disregard today is the one who holds the key to who you become tomorrow. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, please take a moment to subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs the reminder. And always remember, the way you treat the least visible person in the room says everything about who you are when no one is watching. Thank you for being here. The story of Vincent Gray is not just a tale of a CEO's fall from grace. It's a powerful reminder that true leadership begins with humility, and real strength lies in how we treat those we think can do nothing for us. In a world obsessed with status, appearances, and hierarchy, we often forget that every person, no matter their role, carries value, dignity, and a story worth honoring. Vincent once stood at the top of his empire, confident that success was defined by control, by prestige, by being first. But it wasn't until he walked the halls in silence, side by side with janitors, security guards, and cafeteria workers, that he truly understood what it means to lead. He learned not from boardrooms, but from broom closets. Not from praise, but from presence. The old man he once slapped didn't seek revenge. He offered a mirror. And in that reflection, Vincent didn't just see his flaws, he saw a chance to become someone better. So what's the lesson? Never look down on anyone. The person you ignore today may hold the wisdom, the grace, or even the power to change your life tomorrow. And more importantly, you reveal your character, not when you speak to someone above you, but in how you treat someone you believe is beneath you. Titles fade, money moves, but kindness endures. Respect doesn't cost a thing, but its absence can cost you everything. If this story made you reflect, inspired you, or stirred something inside, take a moment to share it. Subscribe for more. And remember, how you treat the quietest person in the room says more about you than your resume ever will.